So I did a version of this one 3 years ago. How about that? There we go. I did a version of this one a few years ago, talking about critical theory, wokeness, and I like this illustration, CRT, critical race theory, in public schools, but it could also be thinking about it as the church, because there are a lot of people in the church who are buying into critical race theory or critical gender theory or critical whatever theory. They're all different forms of the same thing. It's the same concept being inserted. Critical race theory, just for the, we're going to go through each of these in a little more detail, but critical race theory is not just teaching history of people of color or something. That is not what it's about, because virtually everybody's in favor of that. It has something, that's how they sell it, but it's much more than that. So critical race theory undermines biblical authority, it undermines the sufficiency of Scripture, it undermines the biblical view of man, and it undermines the gospel. And we'll see how. You guys might remember some of these headlines. Coca-Cola holds anti-racist training that instructs employees to be less white, according to whistleblower with receipts. They had a video of that and photos and documented it. So this kind of stuff is going on in a lot of corporations, not so much the last 6 months, since President Trump signed several executive orders against this kind of thing. And so you've seen companies that endorsed it before dropping it and backing out of it. Which has been refreshing, but are they only doing it because now it's not the popular thing, and before they were just trying to get in good with whatever the previous administration wanted, or with whatever, you know, they were just kowtowing to certain special interest groups, I don't know. So Walmart had some training where they were essentially telling that the U.S. was a white supremacist system. And so that's been going on. Pope Francis, previous Pope, compared Black Lives Matter's protest to the Good Samaritan. I don't know how you get there from that. When your protests often, not always, often involve burning down businesses or ransacking businesses. I don't know how that is to be compared to the Good Samaritan, unless you're comparing it to the people who hurt the traveler. But that's not what he was doing. So the Bible talks about slavery. There's a Time magazine. The Bible talks about slavery. So why are conservative Christians so afraid of critical race theory? Because it's not that we're afraid of it, it's we understand what it is and how it goes against the gospel, and how it actually is a form of racism, even though it's claiming to be righting wrongs. But you don't right wrongs by creating more wrongs. 2 wrongs don't make a right. So critical race theory battle invades school boards with help from conservative groups. And you guys have probably seen videos where you have students standing before the school board reading stuff that's being taught in the classroom and being silenced by the school board, not even being allowed to read what they're being forced to read in their school. And it's so absurd how far this has gone in some places. So, but it has become a big issue in the last couple of election cycles. And there are a lot of people who just were getting sick and tired of not just CRT, critical race theory, but also the gender stuff. And that's one of the big reasons so many people voted the way they did back in November, because they were tired of seeing biological men in women's sports. And the reason they were being put in there is because of the same sort of critical theory ideology. So what they do is they change all sorts of definitions. This happens so many times because the person who defines the terms wins the debate. You guys have to be aware of that. You can be talking to somebody about something that you believe, and they may be defining terms completely differently than you are. And so you have to set up right from the get-go, what do we mean by this? So be prepared to ask that question. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by anti-racist? We'll get to that in a little while, because it's not racist. It's something very different. So we've seen our culture redefine all sorts of these things. We have a Supreme Court justice who says that she can't define what a woman is because she's not a biologist. But she can use English and she's not an English major. I mean, it's just absurd. These are things that little kids can know the difference between male and female. they don't always get it right exactly. I remember when my son was about 4 or 5, when I was watching basketball, there was a player, a men's basketball, there was a guy with long hair, and he said, "Why is there a girl out there?" And I said, "It's not a girl," but he just saw long hair and thought that's what it was, what the person was. So anyways, they redefine all of these. We'll talk about these as we go along. So there's all sorts of new terminology and a lot of word games. So much of critical theory is just dependent upon continually changing definitions, continually moving the bar, and getting you to agree with something or forcing you to agree with something because of the way that they've redefined things. You've heard of all of these terms that I think most of us would never, 20 to 30 years ago, never would have heard of, and now they're sort of commonplace. Deconstructionism, social justice is not what we think of when you think of justice in the Bible, or justice from a legal perspective. Social justice is very different. Intersectionality, we'll define it a bit, anti-racism, wokeness. It's a little frustrating because of how much has got foisted on people. There are a lot of people who are reacting to it who don't use the terms correctly. So they'll say, well, that's just so woke. They'll talk about a movie being woke. Actually, it wasn't woke, it was just kind of liberal, which is not the exact same thing as woke. So sometimes people will not understand those things correctly. Wokeness refers to that you've become aware, you've woken up to the idea that we live in a racist society, that we live in a society that is always oppressing these groups of people who are minorities in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's women who don't have authority, who have power over men at all, so they're being oppressed. You're waking up to that. So that's what woke refers to. It's not just something that the political party, the Democrats, stand for. They're not always the same thing. Sometimes they are, but they're not always the same thing. Critical race theory, or critical gender theory, or queer theory, or all sorts of other ones. Decolonization, whiteness, white privilege, white supremacy, white fragility, all these terms that I'm sure you guys got through school just fine without ever having to learn them. And yet these are the things that are being pushed onto young kids in our school system today. So I would say it's more about social engineering than it is about education when they're pushing these things. So ultimately where this comes from is out of a Marxist-Leninist worldview. This idea that there's two classes of people. One is the oppressor, one is the oppressed. And no matter what sort of interaction you have with people, it's always about the person in power versus the person who's not in power. And so you shape every single human conversation, interaction in that framework. That's why you see back on October 8th of 2023, the day after more than 1,200 Israelis were slaughtered, brutally slaughtered, and all sorts of other things. I don't even want to describe what happened there. More than 250 kidnapped. What happened on our college campuses, not just here, but also around the world. What happened in major cities all around the world. You had people coming out in favor of Hamas before Israel even retaliated or did anything. They were already going around because they viewed the entire thing through Israel has more power than Hamas, therefore Hamas is the oppressed. Whatever they do is justified. Even if it means the rape, slaughter, and murder of innocent people. It doesn't matter. They still support them. That's why you get groups like Queers for Palestine. Even though if they went there, they would be killed themselves. And they view the entire world through that framework, through that ideology of oppressor versus oppressed. Never stopping to think for a second that Israel is a piece of land about the size of New Jersey, and all of the countries around it, the Arab countries, predominantly Muslim countries, all around it have more than 100 times more land than them, like 100 times more population than them, and yet Israel is the one who is viewed as the oppressor, or they call them colonizers. How do you colonize your own land? Land that your people have been in for at least 3,400 years. But that's the way they're portrayed. So this movement was birthed 2 centuries ago and then kind of reorganized in the latter part of the last century. But we really never caught on until like the last 10 to 15 years, but it was really kind of just it was growing in our universities for a while, since really the 60s, 70s, 80s. It is deliberately and decidedly anti-Christian, but its blind idealism appeals to people who are well-intentioned and naive. You hear about, oh, this group is oppressed. Well, you want to help them, right? If you watch the news, and the news is only showing you the devastation that's in Gaza, and you see people lining up for food, but they're not telling you why that's happened. They're not telling you that Israel is retaliating against a terrorist organization that is hiding under hospitals, or basing their combatants in hospitals, in schools. What are you supposed to do? Just let them keep shooting at you? It's a different thing, and the people are never informed of that. That's why you have people who have no idea when they hear things like from the river to the sea. They don't even know what river, what sea. And they don't even understand that means wipe out every single Jew. But that's what it means. So, anyways, that's how they view the entire world, rather than looking at everybody as a human being who is made in the image of God. Because that's the biblical worldview. Every single one of us is made in God's image, therefore every single one of us has limitless value and should be treated with gentleness and respect as image bearers of God. But that's not how people from this worldview understand things. So, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles: freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guild master and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstitution of society at large, or in the common ruin of the contending classes. Hitherto, every form of society has been based, as we've already seen, on the antagonism of oppressing and oppressed classes. So that's how Marx and Engels viewed the entire world. Lenin, very similar. Democracy is not identical with majority rule. Democracy is a state which recognizes the subjugation of the minority to the majority. That is an organization for the systematic use of force by one class against the other, by one part of the population against another. And in one sense, that's true of if you had a true democracy where everything was voted on for every single decision that was made. We don't have a democracy, we have a representative republic that is democratic in nature and that we get to vote for our representatives. But a pure democracy actually would lead to something like this. And the way our founders set it up is that minority classes would be protected from that sort of thing because of the way the system's set up. We must crush the bourgeoisie in order to free humanity from wage slavery. Their resistance must be broken by force. That was Lenin's view. And you can see what happened in the former Soviet Union in Russia. You can see what Lenin did, murdering millions of his own people in the Ukraine. Long before the current battle going on there. So Marxism and Leninism has failed every single place it's ever been tried, and yet whenever you bring this up, the university students who are so idealistic, they just say, well, it's because it's never been tried the right way. Okay, well, every single time it's been tried, it fails miserably. Over 100 million people slaughtered in the 20th century alone in Russia, China, Cambodia, and other Marxist regimes, and has produced poverty and violence wherever and whenever it has been implemented. And so you can just run a history through the 20th century and look at and you can see it today in South America in certain countries, and it just does not work. And you even have in New York City, the candidate for mayor is an avowed Marxist, socialist. He wants to have government-run grocery stores. How well do you think that would work? Those of you who are old enough who remember growing up in the 80s and always worrying about what Russia was doing and the USSR, one of the problems is we heard about their bread lines and people standing in line for hours just to get bread because they didn't have food, because it was a Marxist society. So the biggest problem with Marxism and with any other system is that people are inherently sinful and they recognize it when they're being treated unfairly. So why work hard and sacrifice and innovate if there's no reward, and those who refuse to do these things will still receive equal pay and benefits? Why? Do you do it just because out of the goodness of your heart? Well, maybe for a little while, and then after a while you think, well, why am I doing this when My neighbor is not lifting a finger to do anything, and yet he gets just as much as I do. At some point, that wears people down. And you try to explain that to students, they don't really get it until you try an experiment with their grades, then they understand. The students who work hard and get the A's, you tell them that you're going to take 2-letter grades from them and give 2-letter grades to the student who's failing so that they both get C's. And they used to think it was fair when it was somebody else's money, but now when it's applied to their grades, now it's not fair anymore. Well, how come? Because they worked hard for that. Exactly. And what happens if you ran that in the classroom? It's not going to be everybody getting C's, because pretty soon even the person who tried hard is going to say, there's no point in trying hard anymore. And so their productivity is going to diminish as well, and everything goes down. And that's what's happened every time Marxism has been implemented. Now, that doesn't mean that capitalism is perfect. It is a far better system in many ways. But what they'll do is they'll highlight corporate greed. Do we have that in capitalistic countries? Yes. Do we have executives who take advantage of the people who work for them and mistreat? Yes, that happens. Greed is a real human problem, and it works across the systems. But every single human economic system is going to have problems because humans are sinful. It's just the way it is. At least with capitalism, it encourages and rewards hard work, innovation, and even though greed can lead to great harm, and in our system we have a bunch of checks and balances to try to prevent some of that, but there's still abuse that takes place. So in the 20th century, Antonio Gramsci kind of reinvented Marxism for the university. He recognized that it failed in the West and why it never caught on in the US and other Western nations because of the Judeo-Christian worldview. He said no communist revolution could take place and no utopia could arrive unless Christianity's cultural hegemony was broken. It refers to the domination or rule achieved through an ideological or cultural means. It infers that a group of people can have the ability to hold power over social institutions, essentially saying that the West has more of a Christian worldview. Most people think more from a Christian perspective, therefore Marxism will never work. It'll never catch on there. So what do? Undermine the Judeo-Christian worldview so that you can implement Marxism. So in the early 20th century, the Frankfurt School applied Marxism to radical social theories and developed critical theory as an expansion of Marx's conflict theory, that there's always the two in conflict. So they wanted to address structural issues causing inequity. It's important to understand inequity is not the same as inequality. Equity is not the same as equality. But they'll use those terms to make you think they're the same thing. Equality refers to everybody having equal opportunity. Equity refers to equal outcomes. I think we can be in favor of the first, at least to some degree. Nobody's ever truly going to have completely equal opportunity. It's just, that's the way it is in a fallen world. But you can strive for something like that, and I think most people would be okay with that. Equal outcome, like with the grades, where you lower the one grades to bring the others up, I don't think most of us would be in favor of, and we shouldn't be. So postmodernism really was started by a bunch of French writers and philosophers, Derrida, Foucault, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the other guy's last name. It's French, so it's probably got like 4 extra letters that don't get pronounced. And they rejected absolute truth. Foucault attacked history, says that you can't trust history because history is always written by the winners, and winners always are going to push their own agenda, and so you don't get the other side. Well, I'm sorry, history is not always written by the winners. Often it is, but it's not always. Sometimes it's written by people who are neutral onlookers. Sometimes it's written by the losing side, and that's what survives. But that sells well if people don't stop and think about it. So Derrida is the one who came up with deconstructionism, which undermined the use of language, arguing that meaning was found in the mind or the view of the recipient. So if I were to write a letter, well, let's try it this way. So Paul wrote a letter to the church at Colossae. Did the church at Colossae get to interpret that and understand it however they wanted to, or is the meaning found in the mind of the sender, Paul, and behind him, inspiring the writing, the Holy Spirit? Meaning is found in what the Holy Spirit wanted written. It's what the sender is saying. So even if the audience misunderstands it, that's not the real meaning. The real meaning is found in the mind of the sender. the writer, the speaker. So what postmodernism does is said, no, meaning is found in the mind of the reader. And so somebody did a critique of his really long book, and they wrote a long book about making up whatever they wanted, and said this is what Derrida's book is about. And he said, that's not what it is. And I'm sorry, it is, because it's found in the mind of the reader. So you can make his writing say whatever you want if you're following what he's saying. So the goal of deconstruction is to identify what they call binary concepts, so these two things that are always in conflict, and set up everything into oppressed and oppressor, to show how language has been utilized for oppression. So Veith said that post-Marxist radicalism constructs new revolutionary ideologies by replacing Marx's concern for the oppressed working class with other oppressed groups, blacks, women, gays. Status and moral legitimacy come from being excluded from power. The victim has the favored role. And that is what we have seen over and over and over again in our culture. And notice when this book was written, 1994. So he identified it 30 years ago. Most of us didn't see it till about 10 years ago. So he had been warning people for a while that's what was coming. So Marxism emphasized economics, postmodernism focused on literature and history, attacking history and tearing down literature, but both of them promote the same thing, the alleged oppressor-oppressed paradigm, and they've set the stage for all the different critical theories that we've seen. So in their book, Cynical Theories, Pluckrose and Lindsay say, although many experts consider postmodernism to have ended in the 90s, the truth is that it morphed into various theories prominent in today's world, and it simply mutated from its earlier and high deconstructive phase into a new form, a diverse set of highly politicized and actionable theories developed out of postmodernism proper. That's what we're critical race theory, critical gender theory. So real quickly, a biblical view on quote-unquote race. We don't like to use the term race that answers in Genesis. We believe that there is one race, the human race. We all go back to Noah and his wife, and before that we all go back to Adam and Eve, meaning that every one of us in here is related. You guys are stuck with me. So, at least for the next few days. But no, even that, ultimately we're family. Acts 17:26, he had made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. And Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. God didn't create a bunch of different people out there. We all go back to Adam and Eve. And the solution to our sin problem that we all have, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. The solution is the same for every single person. And that is, our sin problem needs to be dealt with. Well, it was at the cross by Jesus, and he died on the cross for us all, not just for people who look a certain way. So the biblical view, the way we depict it at AIG, is that. So you get one of the reasons we see the various people groups, or what we might refer to as ethnicities, that can be explained through the Babel event. As you get different family groups splitting off into different areas, certain traits would come to the forefront in different societies. And over time, if you're not introducing new genetic information from outside groups, then you're going to see certain traits, kind of stick there, if that makes sense. But we all have the same skin color. We all have the same pigment called melanin. Some people just have less of it, and some people have more of it. We're all different shades of brown. So it's not that there are different races or different species of humans. We're all human beings made in God's image who all have the same problem, sin, and the same solution, Jesus Christ. If the church taught this rather than one group of people up here is more worthy of help or being cared for or being tolerated, and one group is more worthy of being ridiculed or pushed back all the time. What do we used to call that when you judge people based on the color of their skin? We called that racism. And now they call it critical race theory. No, that if you're white, you're part of the problem. Even if you're not white but you act white, you're part of the problem. That's what they'll say, whatever acting white means. So the origin of CRT, critical race theory, Derek Bell was the first tenured African American at Harvard Law School, and he's considered to be the father of CRT. He wrote Racism Without Racists. So he was talking about how even if you're not racist in your society, The society is still racist because of how it was set up. Openly advocated revisionist history and claimed that America had not and would not ever make any progress in race relations. So has slavery existed before the United States became a thing? Yes. Remember, there were a group of people called the Israelites who were in bondage in Egypt. And Israelites at times owned slaves. Now, they were told by God that they're supposed to care for them in a much different way than what they were treated. But cultures throughout history, from around the globe, no matter what your skin color, there has been slavery. America did not start it. America did help end it. And it's one of the only countries that has done so much to try to overturn years and years and years of abuse. Now, let's be honest, what happened in America, in the South predominantly, was horrible. Enslaving somebody because of the color of their skin it's horrible. And then you had Christians misusing and abusing the Bible to try to justify it. That's a terrible thing. We can admit that. And I think, well, we're from the North. We didn't have slaves. So, no, none of us did. This ended way before we were ever even alive, thankfully. But are there people in this country who have racist ideas? Yes. Is it only from one side? No, of course not. But he argued that America is racist at its core, thus its legal and social structures are also racist. This must all be torn down and replaced with Marxist leadership. This is one of the reasons why they advocate for tearing down statues, anything they don't like, anything that reminds us of history so that we don't learn our history. They are all in favor of tearing down. In 1991, Barack Obama, who would later become president, praised Bell as one who speaks the truth and is an excellent scholar. He urged his audience to open up your hearts and your minds to the words of Professor Derek Bell. And you can see that sort of thinking going through when President Obama was in office. He viewed a lot of things through like an anti-colonialist lens. Bell opposed Clarence Thomas's nomination to the Supreme Court. Why? You would think he would want an African-American man there. Claiming to place a person who looks black and who in conservative terms thinks white is an insult. Anybody remember the Clarence Thomas hearings? Mm-hmm. Anita Hill and all sorts. I was just a kid when that was going on. I still remember that. It was what they did to, and it was awful, similar to what you saw with Kavanaugh and others. It just was terrible. You would think that people on the left would want somebody like Clarence Thomas, but no, they don't, because it's an ideology to them. It's not about the shade of somebody's skin. Bell's feminist successors in the 1980s, black feminists Audre Lorde, Patricia Hill Collins, and Bell Hooks popularized critical theory among feminists. And then one of his students, Kimberly Crenshaw, added ideas about gender and sexuality to critical theory, which led to the concept of intersectionality, which essentially says if you are a member of one of these quote-unquote oppressed classes, you essentially have more intersectionality points. You are more oppressed than others. So if you are a, like me, a straight white Christian male, none, because every single thing I am is an oppressor from their point of view. But if you're somebody who's African American, well, you're oppressed by somebody who's white. If you're gay, you're oppressed by people who are straight. If you're a female, you're oppressed by men. And then they added disability and other things. So those people who have more intersectionality points, if you want to call it that way, than others, they're more oppressed, therefore they're more deserving of assistance, of help, whatever it might be. But do you see what it's doing? It's classifying people and talking about how they should be treated based on certain factors, some of them that they cannot even help. Male or female. Sorry, I know in our culture they think that you can change that. No, every single cell in your body tells you whether you're male or female. That's pretty easy to know biologically. The color of your skin. Okay, you can't change those things. You shouldn't be judged on things like that you can't even, that you have no control over. So intersectionality within CRT points to the multidimensionality, I like these big words they use to make it sound like it's intelligent, of oppressions, and recognizes that race alone cannot account for disempowerment. Intersectionality means the examination of race, sex, class, national origin, and sexual orientation, and how their combination plays out in various settings. CRT recognizes that racism is ingrained in the fabric and system of the American society, the individual racist need not exist to note that institutional racism is pervasive in the dominant culture. Do you see that? You don't even have to ever show evidence that they're the racist, but it's still a racist society. So that is how CRT sees the world. Legal discourse says that the law is neutral and colorblind. However, CRT challenges this legal truth by examining liberalism and meritocracy as a vehicle for self-interest, power, and privilege. See, everything for them is about power, privilege, and they think that every rule, everything is set up just to have power over other people. Now, sometimes it's just to be safe. Sometimes it's to live in a civilized society. Yeah, we think it's wrong for you to run around and shoot people all the time. That's not you don't have a good society that way. That's why we kind of got rid of the Wild West, except for during VBS. Sorry, you can still be a bandit if you need to be. So some of you may have seen this documentary called 13th. It was out, I think it was in 2020. It was really popular. And the entire documentary was based on this Section 1 of the 13th Amendment: neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So no slavery. The entire 13th documentary was about, but they slipped this phrase in there in yellow just so that they can continue slavery by having these racist laws and then imprisoning people who are going to break those laws, which inevitably are going to be people of color, and therefore they're still able to oppress them and keep them in jail. Then they can't vote, so they're being disenfranchised. That's what the entire thing was about. They never asked the question, did the people who are in prison break the law that was made? That's the question that needs to be asked. And then is justice being served? So you've heard of Black Lives Matter, which that has, thankfully, has kind of diminished because there's been so much, been controversial from the beginning, but so much hypocrisy in the movement. They say, this is from their website before people called attention to it and they took it down. But notice what they're saying. This has nothing to do with the color of their skin, for the most part, the skin shade. We build a safe space that affirms black women. What about men? And it's free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered. We make our spaces family-friendly and enable parents to fully participate with their children. We dismantle the patriarchal practice that requires mothers to work double shifts so that they can mother in private even as they participate in public justice work. I'm sorry, I thought the patriarchal society didn't want moms in the workplace. Remember, the feminist movement was pushing back against that. They were the ones that wanted women in the workplace and not in the home. Not the patriarchal system that did that. It was the feminist movement that did that, and getting to the point where they're working double shifts. We disrupt Western prescribed nuclear family structure. See that? We're tearing down the family requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. And then you had things like this. One of the founders of Black Lives Matter spent at least $12 million on luxury properties in LA and Toronto, buying multi-million-dollar mansions in different places. So all this money that was being donated, thinking that they were going to help support the black community in the United States, no, instead it was just being used for fraud by the leaders. So 8 principles of CRT: people are identified by groups according to race, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, and are either an oppressor or the oppressed. Intersectionality is the tool used to determine someone's group and level of oppression. Oppression is the only real sin, and only the oppressors are guilty, and it is systematically present. So that's a problem, because that would mean that the person who is being oppressed really cannot sin. So they can do whatever they want. So they can't. That's why you'll hear, even if you have somebody who, let's say you have an African American who is saying some highly disparaging, racist remarks towards somebody who is white. From their view, it's still not racism, because they're an oppressed group, therefore they cannot be racist. Racism is just a prejudice against somebody because of the way that because of their appearance, because of the shade of their skin or their ethnicity. Number 4, any disparity in outcome between groups is the result of oppression, discrimination, and or racism. It can't possibly be about other factors for them. It's always because of oppression, because of certain laws, because of the system, rather than poor choices by certain individuals. The oppressed have an understanding of reality through their oppression that the oppressors can't have. So therefore, I can never really truly speak about this because I'm not oppressed in any way, shape, or form because I have 0 intersectionality points. Unless I guess, declared that I really think I'm a woman, then I guess I get 1 point and I can speak about that. But it's so silly. Is there an element of truth in to speak authoritatively about something? It helps to have experience in that area? Yes, there's an element of truth, but it doesn't mean that somebody can't learn about that from the outside and speak clearly about it. Number 6, anyone who disagrees with CRT, they're only trying to maintain oppressive power or are deceived. The goal is a redistribution of power, privilege, authority, and resources to the oppressed. That's really ultimately what it comes down. Well, there's a couple things that it comes down to. 1, tearing down society, and redistribution of wealth. 8, the solution is the deconstruction of a systematically oppressive society and a rebuilding of a society that leads to equity. Again, not equality. But think about this. Only in a society that is not oppressive to minority groups could minority groups claim oppression, take action against the so-called oppressor, and not get crushed. If we truly were as racist as they claim, if we truly were as oppressive as they claim, every time they have a march or a rally against that, we would send the military in there to squash them. It doesn't happen. Why? Because we believe in free speech, not oppressor versus oppressed. So the fact that they can scream about this in our streets shows that we're not what they claim that we are. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Amen. I think that's something we should all be, we should hope that America would be. I remember in fact, somebody could go back and look at my Facebook post on it. I remember back in 2008 when President Obama was elected. My post was something to the effect that I'm thankful that America has gotten to the point where we are comfortable electing somebody who is African American. Unfortunately, I don't agree with most of his politics or his policies. I wish it was somebody else, but it's good that we got to that point in our culture, because who could have imagined that 80, 90 years ago? And yet, all that happened is that you get more and more and more so-called racial division because of that sort of ideology being pushed. Racism used to be judging somebody by the color of their skin, their skin tone, but now it's more about who's oppressed and the oppressor. So unfortunately, this has seeped into the church. Even some places that you'd think would be conservative have given into some of these things. So-called all whites, and technically I'm not really white, even though I'm kind of pale, but if you look at my skin next to that, it's not the same, okay? We're all brown, but they're all the oppressors, regardless of circumstance. I'll have some videos here of some Christian leaders talking about this. Whites have engineered the system for their own benefit, and blacks and other minorities are the oppressed. So Daryl Harrison said that CRT is a multi-layer cake, and each layer having a different color, but it's frosted in the end with the same flavor of racist icing from top to bottom. That's true. CRT is racist at its core, but it's an ideology of whiteness, allegedly. What is whiteness? It's an ideology of assumed superiority created by whites used to justify the oppression of non-whites. Therefore, anything part of white culture is part of a systemic oppression and racism. According to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, what are signs of whiteness? Individualism. So they want you to be groupthink? Yeah, they want you to identify by a group. That's all they want. They don't want you to be an individual. Independency? Nope, you have to be dependent on the government. Nuclear family? The way God set it up, mom, dad, and children? Apparently that's whiteness. No, that's the way God set it up. Objective and rational thinking? Well, we want irrational thinking? You want somebody who's you want architect designing your home who doesn't think rationally or objective? You want policemen who are completely subjective, who are going to pull you over or arrest you based on how they feel that day about you, rather than whether or not you were breaking the law? Hard work, apparently, is whiteness. Do you think that African Americans don't work hard, or Asians don't work hard, or any other ethnicity? Do you see how racist this is? And yet this is what is being promoted. Christianity is a sign of whiteness. I'm sorry, I thought that Jesus was a Jew. He was Mediterranean. He's not white. Christianity is not a white man's religion. It is a faith for all people. Respect for authority. That's a sign for whiteness, apparently. Punctuality, being on time. You might remember this one in the news, math. Delayed gratification, saving up for something. Being competitive. It's so bizarre, but do you see what they're doing? If you try to run a culture on a society against all of these things, what do you do to that society? You've just destroyed it. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to tear down society, so anything that creates order and structure, they're trying to tear down, and they're just claiming that it's all part of whiteness. There's a book that was published, this children's book, Not My Idea. So do you guys see the subtitle here? A book about whiteness. You go on in the inside, whiteness is a bad deal. It always was. On the left, dude, we can see your pointy tail, comparing white people to the devil. Contract binding you to whiteness, you get stolen land, stolen riches, special favors, and it's just disgusting. But unfortunately, you get certain Christian leaders who buy into this stuff. I think we'll be able to get the audio through, I'm going to put the mic down here, and you guys should be able to hear it. So, this is Jarvis Williams, professor of New Testament interpretation at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville.
The question is, what is whiteness? Well, here's something that's very important to realize. Whiteness is not about your biology, it's about an ideology. It's a biological fiction, but a social fact. So one aspect of whiteness was a way for Europeans who were different to homogenize themselves into a group known as white, to distinguish themselves from these enslaved Africans. One reason we get slavery is because of the construct of whiteness. One reason, right? Of course, slavery is complicated. But race, hear this carefully, I'm going to lean in on this one, all right? I'm trying to be pastoral. Race and the construct of whiteness, these categories are bad because they have worked historically and socially to prioritize those who identify with whiteness, namely those who would be white people, and those to marginalize those who are not white, namely enslaved Africans or brown people.
There it is, being taught at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Let's see. So according to Jarvis, you heard the same teaching of whiteness there that you'd hear from the lips of people who are on the other side. I'm going to keep this off because there's a video here in just a minute, several of them. White privilege is the unearned advantages possessed by whites in a society created by and for whites. Whiteness was established to create and entrench white privilege. You heard him say almost exactly that. That the Europeans who came from different backgrounds, but they were still white, got together as a way to separate themselves away from the slaves. Did that ever happen historically? Was that something that was thought through or talked about when, during the days when they were writing the Declaration of Independence, when the Constitution was being written? No. Okay, it wasn't about that. And yet this is what's being promoted. Peggy McIntosh and her writing about white privilege said, I have come to see white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets that I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. Are there places in our country today where if you were to walk into a store, into a place as a white person versus somebody as a darker person, where it might be more, would not be as comfortable for you if you were of darker skin than if you were of lighter skin. Sure. If you want to say that that's what white privilege is, then okay, I guess you could make a case that there is a little bit of that going on. But it's not as if when you go into the store you get to pay less because you are white, or you get paid more if you're working there because you are white. So those things don't exist. And are there places where it's the flip side, where it's the reverse? Where if you're somebody who is quote unquote white going into a place, you might feel a lot less comfortable than somebody if you were darker. Yeah, that happens too. Is that because of whiteness or blackness? No, it's reality in a sin-cursed world that there are certain places, you know what, it even happens between city and country and has nothing to do with people's, the skin tone that they have. I'll bet most of the people here who live out in the country get pretty nervous about being in a big city. And you don't really like it. You feel uncomfortable, right? But you know what? If you were to take people from the inner city where there's shootings and stuff going on all the time, and you bring them out here, they'll get really nervous because they think you're going to be walking around with your guns all the time and you're going to shoot them. And you laugh about it because you live here and you know that's not the case, but that's what they think. And so they'd be uncomfortable. It has nothing to do with skin tone in that sense. But that is what happens. Now, here is, I think, the most racist person I've ever heard from in my life, Robin DiAngelo, the woman on the left there. Wow. I had to watch a 2-hour video of her and write a critique. Every word that came out of her mouth, every sentence that came out of her mouth was racist. She's the one that wrote the book called White Fragility. When we use the term white supremacy, we are not referring to extreme hate groups or bad racists. We use the term to capture the all-encompassing dimensions of white privilege, dominance, and assumed superiority in mainstream society. One of the big problems with this, not only is it racist to assume that everybody in a certain group acts a certain way, but what do you think is going to happen to a lot of especially young men who are constantly being berated and told that they're white supremacists? At some point, do you think some of them will say, I might as well be. If you're going to call me that all the time, I might as well go that direction. And some will. And that's unfortunate because we shouldn't have things like that in our society. But again, they're not doing anything to try to solve problems. They're trying to create disruption. They're trying to create problems, and that's what they're doing by tearing everything down. Here's Matt Chandler, a very well-known pastor, who is buying into the exact same thing.
I could go on and on there. But what happens in that kind of upbringing, which is fine, is that there were some lenses put over my eyes in which I saw the world through those lenses, not knowing what those lenses are. And so if I could kind of just be straight at what I'm talking about is that I have grown up with this invisible kind of bag of privilege, this kind of invisible toolkit that I can reach in there at any given moment and have this type of privilege that a lot of other brothers and sisters don't possess. And so if I could just kind of lay it all out there, what I'm talking about right now is white privilege. And so
there it is from a very well-known pastor in our country, almost word for word what we had just read, the quote, the invisible bag that you can pull these things out of. Here's Tim Keller talking about something very similar. And listen to the example he gives and how the two people sitting next to him, how they laugh at it and they think that it's ridiculous that anybody would claim this. And we'll break it down after that. Take a look at, or listen to this.
A friend of mine recently who's a pastor, was talking to a Norwegian man who had just moved into his community and went to his church. And at one point he heard the pastor talking about the fact that we are all complicit in creating this narrative that black people are dangerous, etc. And so we're complicit in this. Afterwards, the Norwegian captain said, "No, I'm Norwegian." No, it had nothing to do with it. And my pastor friend said, studies have pretty much proven that if you have white skin, it's worth $1 million over a lifetime over somebody who doesn't have white skin. And that's because of historical forces that have come about. And at this point, You know, you could go at it several ways. One, as I mentioned, if you have that asset of white skin right now, historical asset, then you actually have to say, I didn't deserve this. And also, to some degree, I'm the product of, I'm standing on the shoulders of other people who got that through injustice. So the Bible actually says, yes, you are involved in injustice, and even if you didn't actually do it, therefore you have a responsibility, not just to say, well, you know, maybe if I get around to it, maybe we could do something about the poor people out there. No, you're part of the problem.
Sorry, I didn't realize the mic moved off the speaker that much. I don't know if you heard everything there, but did you get his example? The Norwegian guy who had just moved into the community? He's still a part of the problem. He's still part of the one who set up the culture, even though he wasn't here to set up the culture. But because he has a certain skin color, he has to be blamed for it. That is what we traditionally have called racism. Now, they didn't ask the necessary question. They just assumed because there is inequality so there's not equal outcome. They said if you have white skin, it's worth, he said, I don't know if you heard that part, it's worth $1 million more than if you have dark skin. That's pretty absurd given the fact that people from India in the United States make more than people who are white in the United States. On average, they're the highest grossing ethnic group in the United States. Asian, Japanese, Chinese, that is next. But I thought it was whiteness. I thought it was all about white were the one. No, it's not that. There are other factors at work. Part of this has been due to the absolute destruction of the African American family. And that's been something that has been targeted. And yet they don't ever want to talk about that as being a major cause of a lot of these horrible outcomes. It's not the only thing. I'm not saying it's just because there's so much fatherlessness, but that is a big part of it. But you see it in, guess where, do you know what the poorest part of this entire country is? The poorest counties in the United States, do you know where they are? They're in Kentucky. It's southeastern Kentucky, Appalachia. Predominantly white, extremely poor, huge amounts of our vice president grew up in that sort of culture. And it's not about the color of the skin, it's about the upbringing, and the society around them have far more to do with that. All right, so professor, white people should commit suicide in an ethical act. If he's white, I would like to tell him to lead by example. They never do. They always want you to do it, but they'll never do it. So this is another one at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. It's the same sort of thing. He's basically saying he's telling a bunch of white students that if the way you were brought up, you think it's good and wholesome, everything. No, it's actually part of this evil system. Yeah, your parents trained you to love Jesus and to love God and treat your neighbors well and work hard, but that's part of a racist system. That's at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. It's insane, the stuff that has been going on for a while here. The Bible says you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, and yet we've heard a lot of people bearing false witness in these things. Brothers, do not slander one another. By the way, anybody, I want to be careful how I say this, not every single person who says that they support like CRT, BLM, or some of these other things, really truly understands the stuff that they're into. They just think, I'm trying to help my friends who are African American, I'm trying to stand for them, I'm trying to help them. Okay, good, that's good that you're trying to, but the place that you're sending the money to is not helping them at all. It's hurting. So you got to be smarter about it. Does the Bible teach individual guilt or collective guilt? At least as far as when we stand before God, are we guilty for what others do or guilty for what we do? What we do. The Bible says, fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor shall children be put to death for their fathers. A person shall be put to death for his own sin. You're held accountable for what you do, not for what your great-great-great-great-grandparents might have done if they lived in the South and happened to own slaves. So even if your great-great-great-great-grandparents were the ones who helped end the slave trade, You're still part of the oppressor. The Bible says no, a person is guilty for their own sin. The people who are sent to the lake of fire in Revelation chapter 20, they are going to be judged according to their works, their own works, not somebody else's. Nobody goes to the lake of fire because of what Adam did. Nobody goes because of what other people who had their skin shaved did. It's what they do. The soul who sins shall die, Ezekiel says. The son shall not bear the guilt of the father, nor the father bear the guilt of the son. The righteous and the righteous of the righteous shall be upon himself. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. For it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. So then each of us shall give an account of himself to God. Therefore let us not judge one another anymore, but rather resolve this, not to put a stumbling block or cause to fall in our brother's way. We needed to love every single person because we are all made in the image of God. It's not to categorize and group people into different categories, which is what CRT and all these other ones do. I mentioned white fragility before. You guys know what a loaded question is? It's like if I were to ask you if you stopped beating your wife yet, if you're a guy, a married guy. You can't. It's not just a yes or no. Because if you say yes, oh good, you stopped beating her. That means you used to beat her. If you say no, that means you're still doing it. This is how, you know how they have these hearings in Congress all the time, and you always get these senators or congressmen and women who want to just get like their 5 minutes of questioning. They don't ever ask a question. All they do is berate the person there for like 4 minutes, and then they'll finally get around, this is a yes or no question, and they ask them a loaded question. And when the person tries to explain themselves, like, it's a simple yes or no. Because that's what they're doing. They don't want to have a dialogue. They don't want to understand. All they care about is their own position, getting their own little sound bite that they want, and trying to make the other person look horrible, rather than treating somebody with dignity and respect. This is what white fragility is. The inability to tolerate the racial stress of a challenge to our positions or perspectives. White fragility functions to block the challenge and regain white racial equilibrium. Therefore, anything part of white culture is part of systemic oppression and racism. A bunch of mumbo jumbo. Basically what it means is if anybody ever points out to somebody who is white that they are part of a system or that they are doing something that is part of whiteness and you try to deny it, it's only because you have white fragility and you're a racist. This is Robin DiAngelo. She's the one who wrote the book on it. She said, racism exists today in traditional and modern forms. All members of the society have been socialized to participate in it. All white people benefit from racism regardless of intentions. Intentions are irrelevant. The question is not, did racism take place, but rather how? She's also the one who was on Matt, I just lost his last name, the guy from the Daily Wire.
Matt Walsh.
Matt Walsh. So what was his, What Is a Woman? Is that the show, or was it something more recent? Did he have a more recent movie?
He has What Is a Woman and then Am I Racist?
Am I Racist? So that one, he got her on camera, which was shocking. I don't know how much he paid. Actually, it does show. He pops up a thing how much they cost. Now, she's somebody who says that she's a socialist, and yet she charges like $26,000 for an hour interview. That sounds like a greedy capitalist, but that's what she does. And at the end of the interview, he says, well, do you want to start making reparations right now? Because you're white, and our cameraman is a person of color. You should probably pay him some of what I paid you for this interview. And actually got her to pay him some money right there on the spot. Otherwise, she would have just looked like a complete hypocrite, which she is. She said, racial socialization sets up to repeat racist behavior regardless of our intentions or self-image. Therefore, we must continue to ask how our racism manifests, not if. Maybe you saw the person who was brought in, another congressional hearing where the person was asking her, are you a white supremacist? Because she defined white supremacy in such a way that she would have to say that she is. And she refused to answer the question. And he's like, I can't believe that you won't deny being a white supremacist. And she's like, well, I don't know what that has to do with our discussion. No, it's because this is what you're pushing. And so she couldn't say yes to it because then she'd be on camera telling everybody she's a white supremacist. She couldn't say no because then she'd be denying everything that she teaches. So she just kept trying to change the subject. It's bizarre. There's no logic to it at all. For as long as America exists with its current institutions, it will also need to be in group therapy where our turn begins with, hi, I'm America and I'm racist. Every sentence that comes out of her mouth is racism. Though white fragility is triggered by discomfort and anxiety, it is born of superiority and entitlement. White fragility is not weakness per se. In fact, it is a powerful means of white racial control and protection of white advantage. I'm not even going to subject you to listening to her. It's just, she's so obnoxious, and we're running out of time. But anti-racism does not mean against racism. That's what you'd think it would mean, but it was a term that Ibram X. Kendi, he changed his name to that, Ibram Henry Rogers, refers to it as standing against policies that promote racist power. That is, any policy that results in inequity of outcome must be racist. If you pass a law, and let's just say that that law, let's say 20% or 10% of people who are African American break that law and go to jail, 8% of white people break that law and go to jail. It's a racist law. They don't ask the question, did those people break the law? They assume because a higher percentage went, it must be racist. That's what he's talking about with our system. Fundamentally racist, its heartbeat has always been, fundamentally racism, its heartbeat has always been denial. And the sound of that heartbeat has always been, I'm not racist. To be more specific, the sound of that heartbeat is not racist. If you claim that you're not racist, you are being racist. You can't win. That's a loaded question. It's like the white fragility. It's like the have you stopped beating your wife? No matter what you do, you can't win. If you ask Robin DiAngelo, so what should I do as a white person? Just sit down and shut up and listen. Really? So that other people can dominate? So you just want, you want to, what you claim is a wrong, you want to perpetrate another wrong. Again, two wrongs don't make a right. If there's a disparity between racial groups, it must be because of racist power and policy. It can't be due to the way that people have been brought up in those cultures. Again, why do Indian Americans, not Native Americans, but people from India, their ancestry from India, or Asian, why do they succeed so well in America if it's all about whiteness? We as Americans have been taught that if you have racial inequity, if you have racial disparity, there must be something wrong with the people on the lower end. It's not necessarily that there's something wrong, it's a lot of times how they've been raised and how a lot of times in our culture push people a certain way. Have you guys ever noticed, maybe not, well, I'm sure you see it here, little kids, when they're playing, do they care what the color of skin is of the person they're playing with? Ever. Do they ever care? No. But isn't it sad by the time they reach 7th or 8th grade, you have our society kind of pushing people a certain way, saying, no, you need to be more like this and you should be more like this, rather than we're just human beings who are getting along and we're friends and because we like each other? It's tragic, but that is something that's been going on. It's the way that people have been brought up. Racism is a marriage of racist policies and racist ideas that produce and normalize racial inequities. Racism itself is institutional, structural, and systemic. This is the guy who was given $40 million to run a program on anti-racism. I think it was at Boston U, if I remember correctly, and squandered it completely, cannot give an accounting for where it went or what happened, did nothing with it. So since that, he's kind of fallen out of favor. But for a while, he was on the interview circuit quite a bit. Social justice encompasses all of these critical theories, race, gender, queer, etc. Ultimately, these ideas are all about creating division and tearing down the Judeo-Christian foundation of the nation. Social justice is not justice. True social justice would be what the Bible commands us, that we go out and we care for the poor, for the needy, the sick, the orphan, the widow, right? The Bible speaks of those things. And the church, by and large, has done that. Maybe not always perfectly, maybe not every church does that, but a lot of churches throughout our culture have done that. There's a reason why America has been, by far, the greatest humanitarian giver of humanitarian aid the world has ever seen. And there's not even a close second. And yet, we're the ones who are being constantly berated for being racist, for being greedy, for being all these other things. And yet it's because of the Judeo-Christian worldview where we believe that we're supposed to do these things. But social justice is saying that the government must step in and decide based on skin color, based on gender, based on your sexuality, those sorts of things, who gets what. And take from those who have and give to those who do not have. That's not justice. Justice is doing what is right and treating people rightly rather than taking from some and giving to others. So social justice warriors love to quote biblical passages about caring for the poor, but it is actually unjust to take from those who have worked for something and then give it to those who refuse to work, and we'll see that the Bible actually says that as well. Justice exists because there's a just God. He's the source of our morality. We recognize justice and injustice because we're made in God's image. Injustice exists because people are sinners, not because you look a certain way or because you have a certain, because you're male or female or anything like that. Critical social justice is just the state redistributing through power and politics. Biblical justice is commanded by God, and it's a heart issue. So does the Bible endorse social justice? Not so much in 2 Thessalonians 3. For even when we are with you, we commanded you, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. Notice what it says. Anyone will not work. So able-bodied. It doesn't say if anyone cannot work. So if somebody's not able to, yeah, you help them out. So if anyone will not, then he doesn't eat. They don't ever quote that verse. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That's 1 Timothy 5:8. You don't hear that one quoted by them very much, do you? So Jesus says it's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth, this defiles a man. But those things that which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile the man. So it's not because of what other people have done, it's what I have done. I'm held accountable for what I have done. It's not what others have done. It's not because of the way I look, even though that might be offensive to a lot of you, but it's, sorry, the way God made me. So wokeness is, I mentioned before, it's when a person awakens to their oppressive ways of living and thinking, and they either allow new voices to take over or join the mob to overthrow Judeo-Christian morality, free market capitalist economies, and the freedoms of expression, speech, and press. That is wokeness. So CRT is anti-gospel. It adds works and subtracts power from the gospel. It denies it is finished because whites must always do more. And the only sin, again, is being an oppressor. It denies the transforming power of the gospel because the saved are still guilty of other sins. If someone could right every single injustice, it would not buy one drop of from Calvary or earn 1 second of eternity from God. It's not about trying to level the playing field, as it were. It's about the fact that we are sinful beings and we are made in the image of God, and we need Jesus to step in and save us, rescue us, because we've rebelled against our infinitely holy God. So these two ideas, the Word of God and critical social justice, are diametrically opposed. Who are we according to these two views? Well, according to critical social justice, we identify based on our group. According to what the Bible tells us, we are all made in God's image. That's who human beings are first and foremost. I was stunned last November. I had an opportunity to speak, to do an event where at the end of it we had a Q&A, and it was a large audience, and this the topic came up about whether or not it was ever okay to tell a lie. Like if you were in Nazi Germany and the Nazis came to the door and you were harboring Jews, what do you do? And I know in theory exactly what I would do. Whether I would actually have the conviction in the moment to do it, I would lie to the Nazi guard. In a heartbeat, I would lie. I know some people might disagree with that and say, no, that's not the right thing, but that's exactly what I would do. And this person argued with me for a while, and afterward we chatted up front, and I said, so let me just ask you a question. If it was a family member that you were hiding, they wanted, would you lie? Oh yeah, I'd lie then. I don't know if that was the reason that he was opposed to the first thing, that he was anti-Semitic, or if it didn't hit home yet. It's somebody else that I don't know, so I don't care. But when it's somebody that I do know, then I do care. No, guess what? That other person that you don't know is an individual who's made in the image of God, and they don't deserve to go to the gas chambers, no matter who they are. But that's how we need to look at people, is that they're human beings made in God's image, not that they're part of a certain group, whether we like or don't like. Man's problem, according to critical social justice, oppression, but only some of them are guilty of that, the people who are the oppressors, because the people who are oppressed can't possibly do that. They're not in a position to do it. The Bible tells us it's sin, and we're all guilty of it. We've all sinned. The solution, according to them, activism, revolution, redistribution. Bible, salvation is in Christ alone. life's focus, they have to identify oppression, demand restitution. The Bible says glorify God in all areas of life. So, critical social justice seeks to create conflict, divide, conquer, and rebuild. You see it through all sorts of different forms, and every single time, all it does is create all of these things: conflict, division, and it destroys families, it destroys societies. That's their goal. That's what they want. That is why they hate the biblical worldview, because it unifies humanity in our value, in the fact that we're all sinful, and in the need of salvation found in Christ alone. From critical social justice, there is no reconciliation. That's not the goal. Notice that? If you ever ask, what can I do to right, there is nothing you can do that will make it right. Because to them, that's not the goal. The goal is to tear down. It's not to create. It's not to unify. It's not to make things better. It's to destroy. Christianity is a ministry of reconciliation between man and God and between man and man. Thus, it is completely at odds with all of these critical theories. So Genesis 1-11 tells us, answers these questions for us as far as the issue of gender. God made us male and female. Tells us that in Genesis chapter 1. Marriage, and by the way, all of us in God's image, male and female. Marriage, one man, one woman. That's right there in Genesis chapter 1 as well. Identity, all of us are made in God's image. The problem, we've all sinned. And quote-unquote race, well, the various people groups that we have, that can be explained by the Babel event, but ultimately we are all one race because we all go back to Adam and Eve. So in Genesis 1-11, we have the answers to all of those things. The exhibit we're creating at the Creation Museum right now called Radiance is going to deal with some of these issues, but in a sensitive way. It's actually geared for a younger audience, like 12-year-olds, which is the first time we've done an exhibit like this. And it'll be written as if it's talking to them. You're going to see a whole bunch of like what looks like broken glass all over the place with all these different mixed messages from our culture about how you get to define your own identity, you get to do all this kind of stuff. And all of that's broken, all these competing messages are wrong. And as you move further through the exhibit and you're getting closer and closer to the solution, which is the gospel and that we are made in God's image, you'll see those broken shards of glass all coming together to form something beautiful. Because when we base our identity on who God says we are, that's where we find wholeness and completeness. But if you listen to our world and everything that it's telling us, it's complete brokenness and hopelessness. And that's what we're seeing in our culture. So it's tragic when you see so many young boys and girls thinking that they're the wrong gender or something, and they need to go through some sort of surgery, or they need to do puberty blockers, they do something else, and then that's going to help them feel better about themselves. No, that's not the problem. There's a deeper issue there. And the church should understand what has been going on in our culture and be there with the solution. And to do it in a way that is loving and caring for people who are truly, genuinely struggling through some really big things. Rather than just, you wretched sinner, you're horrible, you need to repent. That is not going to really work well for a lot of people. Is it true? Yes. But let's speak the truth in love. There's a difference between speaking the truth in love and speaking the truth is love. Too often we think the second one, right? We think if you speak the truth, well, that's loving. Well, it should be. But it's not always the most loving. Some people don't do it in love. 19 years ago, next week, what's the date today? 8th? 4 days from now. 19 years ago was the day I was diagnosed with leukemia. If my doctor would have started laughing in my face and held up the chart and like, you got cancer, would that be true? Yes. Would it have been loving? No. I'd be like the biggest jerk in the world to say something like that. Thankfully he wasn't. He was a great doctor and I owe him my life. But speaking the truth in love, we need to care for those people because they are people who are made in God's image. All people are made in God's image. For you are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you were baptized into Christ, have put on Christ, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. It's not saying that there aren't Jews anymore or Greeks anymore, there's not slaves or free anymore, there's not male or female anymore. It's saying in Christ we all come to Christ the same way, and that is through faith in Him. We all are saved the same way. And we all have the same problem. So the gospel is the solution, Revelation 7. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. It's a beautiful picture that someday we're going to get to experience, that there are redeemed from every single corner of the globe. I know the globe doesn't really have corners, but that's... So we are commanded to love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like it. We are to love your neighbor as yourself. You are to love one another. We are to love our enemies. I think that covers everybody, doesn't it? That's what we're commanded to do, not to try to destroy them, not to mock them when they're struggling, when they're hurting, but to be there. And sometimes it means we got to humble ourselves. I know it can be fun to, when we're proven right about something, to want to taunt, but maybe it's okay in basketball, but no, not other places. Even then. All right, so I think we got just a few minutes left. Any thoughts, comments? I'll say again, it has been so refreshing over the last 6 months to see a decline in this going on. Even like the man named Leah Thomas, who just had the records and medals and everything from Penn stripped and given to the women who actually swam those races. That's been good, and a lot of other situations like that. But there's still states where it's going on. You still have boys on women's teams who are dominating and taking championships from them. But that's not the only way this shows up. There's in a lot of other ways as well. That's just one that I think for most people it was one step too many, and they're like, you know what, we got to fight back against this because it's crazy. And it is crazy, but all of it has been. And we just didn't really speak up, or we were afraid to speak up. But it's not fun to be called racist, but it's lost its value because everybody's been called racist so many times. You're like, well, it doesn't mean anything anymore. So I think that's backfired on them as well. It's not a weapon they used to use, but it doesn't really have the same effect. Because when everybody's a racist, then nobody is. That make sense? So, all right. Not really logical. Everybody could still be racist. But from a cultural point of view, it wouldn't have the impact. All right. Any thoughts or comments? Did you really want me to play Robin DeAngelo for you? You'll be glad that I didn't. Trust me. Oh. Do you want to?
You touched on a lot of things tonight. And, I don't remember who it was. I heard listened to a speaker one time that said that Christianity is like it's always under attack, but we're the one group that kind of stands in the way. We won't just follow along with what they want.
Yep.
So we're always going to try to be attacked. And then you played these things from these colleges, you know, and just a while ago I seen an interview done by R.C. Sproul.
Yep.
He's wearing oxygen there. This guy asked him, you know, what would you say to a young man who was thinking about being a pastor? And R.C. Sproul said, well, you know, I have degrees and stuff, but he said, you know, I don't know if I'd even recommend seminary. He said, two things, know your Bible and pray a lot.
Yep.
That's kind of, I mean, that was good, but it's kind of sad in a way, too.
It is sad. You would hope that the seminary is going to put people on the right track. And there are still some good ones, but ultimately, you're responsible for knowing the Bible, for checking everything against Scripture, no matter what your professor is telling you. I went through a lot of seminary, a lot of different programs, but I picked certain ones I knew that weren't going to be woke or weren't going to have a lot of liberal teaching, but not everybody is aware of those things before they go in. I had the benefit of being a bit older going into it and have studied for years before jumping into it. Some people don't have that benefit. And it is really sad. Sometimes you get, even though schools might start out well, they're human. They're made up of humans who feel pressure and all sorts of other things, and cave, unfortunately. But they shouldn't.